All right, welcome to a very special Pro Football Doc Sports Injury Central podcast. This is kind of an annual deal that I look forward to a lot because it's with my friend Evan Silva, and of course everyone knows him. Like if you're in the industry, you don't know Evan Silva. You're not in the industry, right? Established the run, has been there now 5 years. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, 5 years in the books. This will be our sixth NFL season. And in the meantime, we've added NBA and we cover golf intensely and we cover MMA. So we've expanded. And but we started with football, and I think that's still the nuts and bolts of what we do.
Oh, that's same with Sports Injury Central. I don't know that we're 5 years yet. Look, Evan, I remember having prolonged phone call / podcast with you and Warren Sharp back in the day. And you guys would go on for hours and I'd come in for half an hour or 20 minutes and I really enjoyed getting educated. You guys would try and bring me in just for the injury side. And I'd be like, no, I want to hear what you're thinking about the whole picture and then figure out how injuries play into it. Right. Kind of deal. But always appreciate you and your work. Congratulations on 5 years. And per usual with this, I'm not a good podcast preparer. Like, everything inside and out. I almost will let you run with your thoughts and or questions related to injuries. And this way, it'll flow as a nice conversation. So fire away, questions, thoughts. And we've actually prepared our preseason injury preview and actually finished the current version. Of course, it needs some scrubbing and changing this weekend. Of course, then, more guys get hurt. Ebicom tears his Achilles and more, and we have to always keep updating things. But we'll have that released pretty soon with the first tranche here of all 32 teams. And there's some interesting trends there that we can get into after your list of questions.
Yeah. I'm just going to start right off with a guy who's already banged up in training camp and has had, several severe injuries over the last few seasons. That's J.K. Dobbins. The Chargers want to run the ball more under Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. I think that they're going to be successful running the ball, but we're trying to figure out which individual players are going to benefit most from this schematic change. J.K. Dobbins they got for a really cheap contract, again, those injuries, and now he's already on the shelf early in camp. What are your thoughts on J.K. Dobbins?
Well, I can't talk about my old Chargers without talking about Jim Harbaugh. I know Jimmy pretty well, has some good stories about him. He actually finished his career with the San Diego Chargers. And Jimmy's, as you see it, man, he's very authentic, and what he says goes. He has a very unique style, and I think players will really rally around him. I'm excited to see the new brand of football and what he can bring. It's a little bit Baltimore West, right? I mean, he's got Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Look, I love J.K. Dobbins as a player, and contrary to what you've probably seen in the past, it seems like I don't like him. I keep fading him based off of injuries, but it's based off of injuries. He had a multi-ligament injury that couple years ago when he came back, ACL and more, and then he subsequently talked about it. He actually outperformed that year because even though he had an in-season knee scope that year, he finished off the year pretty well. So I can't speak more highly about him as a person and an athlete, but his knee just hasn't really held up and is not 100% still. And then, of course, the Achilles is that compensation injury. So age creeps in. Look, I don't know. Certainly there's some optimism in Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman's offense that he's going to be productive. But Gus Edwards is there too, and he's had a knee scope or something as well too. So, it's almost they want to run the ball, but I still am not completely sold on J.K. Dobbins, although he's trying to put the injuries behind him. It's still mileage on this running back. If you're picking between the two, I would say Gus Edwards.
Yeah, he's definitely the safe pick, I think, right now, especially with Dobbins already getting banged up. I was kind of looking at J.K. Dobbins as a potential sleeper because people have written him off. The NFL has almost written him off, but it's discouraging that he's already hurt. Christian Watson over the last couple seasons has flashed dynamic vertical playmaking ability for the Packers. And the Packers, this is another situation where we think that the Packers are going to be really good as a passing offense. We're trying to identify which individual actors are going to benefit most from that success. Christian Watson may have the highest ceiling of all the Packers are like, they have like 5 quality young receivers, 2 quality young tight ends. Christian Watson might have the highest ceiling of them all, but he has these recurring hamstring injuries. Is this something that he can overcome at some point? I know that there's been like reports that the Packers are like trying to do something specifically to help him get over the hump. Is that possible?
It is possible to a certain extent. I don't like to use the term injury prone. You know that. And because to me it disrespects a player. It's the collision sport of football, not contact sport, but collision sport. So, if you're injuring 4 different body parts and missing time because you of the style of play, I hate to label that injury prone. Maybe prone to injury based on the type of play and the type of runner that you are, but injury prone is not one unless it's something that's recurrent, like let's say recurrent hamstring, same area, same side. Can it be fixed? It can be adjudicated with off-season regimes and stretching programs, flexibility, and otherwise. Fixed like in 3 months, I think that's asking a lot, but across last season's work in an off season, I think it can be improved. And so, let's hope. Christian Watson and the Packers have to make that a concentration. So that area can be helped. So schematically, if you think he's the guy, I'd have some cautious optimism that they can get by these chronic hamstring issues.
I like it. I actually just moved him up in my rankings, and so that makes me feel a little bit more confident in that. In terms of average draft position, so Nick Chubb he blew out his knee. I think it was week 1 last year, wasn't it? And
pretty early.
It was very early.
It might not have been week 1 because that was Aaron. You know what? It might have been week 2 because on my the only fantasy I play, Evan, is I do the Scott Fish Bowl. And in week 1, I had Aaron Rodgers go down. And I think it's week 2, I had Nick Chubb go down.
Right. So Nick Chubb blows out the same knee that he blew out in college. Now, that was a while ago. I don't know if those two things matter. Nick Chubb played a lot of good football in between the 2 injuries. But then this video comes out of him squatting, I don't know, some ungodly amount of weight. And then his ADP rose like 10 spots immediately after that video came out. And I'm like, wait. Don't we want to see the running back making cuts, right? We're not looking for, an ungodly amount that he's squatting. What do you think about that?
Well, I have mad respect for Nick Chubb. And that is not the injury that he suffered is not an ACL tear. It is a knee dislocation. Go back and look at the video. Multiple ligaments, including the entire medial side of his knee. This in some ways is worse than what J.K. Dobbins went through, right? And, the video was very grotesque in the whole deal. And no, you can't say that this is an ACL and he's going to do fine. Look, I think it's awesome that he's still with Cleveland. They've adjusted his contract. I think it's awesome that we've heard optimism. I think it's unbelievable that he can squat 800 pounds, but that's Nick Chubb. That's the superior athlete that he is. As you point out, what you squat does not make you a dynamic running back. And so I would not have changed not that I have an ADP ranking. I would not have voted for anyone to move him up on the ADP based on that video. First of all, if you look at the video very closely, I couldn't be more impressed with how much weight that he's squatting. But if you look at it, he clearly favors his left knee. He steps into it more with the right. The weight is slightly shifted over to the right side. He steps off with the right. That's not a dynamic motion. It shows he's an incredibly hardworking professional NFL athlete. It doesn't show me anything dynamically. Now, the good news is Nick Chubb is such a great athlete and great running back that, look, if he were just a guy, he would be out of the league for sure. Because he is special, I think he has a chance to stay in the league, and I hope he does. But it is way too much to ask to say that Nick Chubb is going to be anywhere near himself. Andrew Berry, even today, there's been a lot of optimism coming out of Cleveland. And even today, and we've always been somewhat guarded with Nick Chubb. And Andrew Berry today said, really like something, I'm paraphrasing, something like really like where he's at, really happy he's making great progress, but he's got a way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're saying. I mean, our Taylor's on the back end here. I can look it up, but his 6 score for this season is low.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying normally a healthy Nick Chubb can get you 1,400 yards, I mean, it's less than half of that. You know, I think there's no way he's not starting on PUP and more. And, so we still remain guarded with Nick Chubb and almost, let someone else in your league take him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's not going to drop down to where we think his value is. I would say even before the squat video, his ADP was too high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a score 31 in the back end. Sorry, Evan. And it was a week 3 injury, guys.
Yeah.
Okay,
week 3, 31. So, if he's normally 1,000-yard back, which obviously he's probably more, that's 310 yards is what we're saying.
Also in week 3, Mike Williams, then of the Chargers, wide receiver, tore his ACL. He's had kind of injury problems for the duration of his career, really going back to neck injuries at Clemson and concussions and all that. Obviously, this isn't related. But now he goes to the Jets on a 1-year deal. The way that he plays, because he's a back shoulder winner, Aaron Rodgers can throw the back shoulder, with the best of them. So I think that on paper, it could be a really nice fit. But how do we feel about his health? His injury did, again, occur all the way back in week 3. And I think it was a clean ACL tear.
Well, yeah. I mean, it usually just gets reported as an ACL unless, like the video we saw of Nick Chubb is what made us say big time knee dislocation. And remember, Nick Chubb had 2 surgeries, right? Already. One to fix the MCL and then to do the ACL. Initially, it was a lot of, agent speak. It's not that bad. He's okay. And it was just an MCL. Well, they just fixed the MCL. They didn't fix the rest. I know some national reporters said he might not need the ACL. Well, he did in the end, and that's all Nick Chubb. Mike Williams is much more straightforward, and I'm with you. My biggest worry on Mike Williams for him to have success is scheme fit Aaron Rodgers system. And you're right, he may be a really good target for Aaron Rodgers. He really hasn't had one of those guys. Mike Williams does not rely on separation to get open. And and I don't know if we were going to get to him. I would be much more worried in terms of injury on Tank Dell with the Texans than Mike Williams with the Jets. Now, with Mike Williams, the worry is scheme and meshing with Rodgers and his new system, and is he going to fit in? Tank Dell relies on his speed, cutting, and separation. Now, he's not an ACL, it was the ankle fracture, but he makes a living at that. Small guy, speed guy, quick in and out guy. Mike Williams does not. He's a big body receiver. So that's why I'm more optimistic on Mike Williams at this point in time.
That's really interesting. I wasn't even going to bring up Tank Dell. But you're right. His game, he's actually not even that fast. I mean, he ran 4.43, but he's 160 pounds or something. And that's actually not that fast he's fast, okay, but he's not like a blazer. He wins with agility and routes and cutting. And you think that what is it, a fibula and ankle fracture?
Yeah, a fibula and likely ligaments too.
Okay.
And obviously it happened blocking, but who knows? I mean, if for some reason the Texans decide, and obviously they've changed some personnel, they've added Diggs and Mixon and what have you. But if you're saying that's okay, he just won't block, but that's going to cost you plays on the field, which ultimately costs you reps, right? It flows downstream. So I have some worry about him until we see it. I haven't seen enough practice footage yet of him to know that he's 100% in and out of cuts with his agility and his speed and quickness. So I just bring that example up in terms of a big contrasting style between Mike Williams and Tank Dell. And one's an ankle and one's an Achilles.
Javonte Williams last season was really inefficient. I think he was at 3.2 yards per carry. They tried to give him a lot of work, and it wasn't successful. He at the time was coming off of a major knee injury and maybe wasn't ready. There have been some hints that maybe his conditioning wasn't up to par. But then he shows up to training camp and he's like apparently in tip-top shape, and Sean Payton's talking him up and the offensive coordinator's talking him up. Should we expect him? And his ADP is like, he's pretty cheap in drafts right now. I mean, you could sometimes get him in the 7th, 8th, 9th round for a guy that, has workhorse potential. What are your thoughts in general on his return and where he's at?
Last year, we really faded Javonte Williams. Couldn't fade him enough. And have to give him credit. He probably outperformed how badly we faded him, right? If I remember correctly, we thought there was no way that he wouldn't be on PUP to start the season because he was multi-ligament too, more than just ACL. There was a posterolateral corner involved, LCL involved. Now, I believe he made it off PUP and played, but as you note, he wasn't anywhere near himself. And playing does not equal the same guy, and he wasn't the same guy. He did better than we expected, so we'll take an L on that. But, the injury is the injury, and he didn't fare very well. We have some cautious optimism this year now that his ADP is so low. Like last year, I wasn't going to come close to touching him. Now his ADP is so low, depending on what you have for roster construction, do you want to take a flyer on him? I think there's a chance he can be better this year than last year. Is he going to reach the potential that he had before he was injured? Maybe not, but a much better chance this year than last year. And of course, it ends up being, what's his role in Sean Payton's offense? Is Sean Payton talking him up to trade him? Is Sean Payton talking him up because he likes to talk up his own players? Or is this all real, right? I mean, we all know the game of coach speak, and I'm not singling out Sean Payton. Every coach does it to some extent.
Yeah, I have a little bit of just internal bias against Javonte Williams because I love Audric Estime. I mean, this was like one of my favorite players to watch. I'm like a big Notre Dame fan, and he was my favorite one. He was an absolute stud in college, like like an Eddie George kind of player, a big back who could bang long runs. But when I look at it on paper and try to remove my bias, it looks like like Javonte Williams is a buy in the 8th and 9th round of fantasy drafts. You want to talk a little bit about Audric Estime? He just had a fairly routine knee scope, right?
Yeah, if the knee scope is just for a small loose chip or a meniscus, it's not much of a worry. And I will admit, I don't know him that well in terms of style and what have you. I take great pride in that there's a lot of people now doing injury reporting type things. I think we try to hold ourselves out as to still doing injury analysis. In other words, we're not buying what the coach is saying or the agent or the team. Mm-hmm. We're looking at it ourselves. And I take great humor that, knee scope, that's 4 to 6 weeks, or this, that, the other. That's a running back. Not all players are the same. Not all running backs are the same. Not all knee scopes are the same. There's a lot of qualitative stuff that goes into it. Just like you're looking at a guy, you're looking at who the new OC is in the offensive line and the backfield, who else is in the backfield. There's so many different factors that you have to factor in. So I don't know this player as well from style. I will admit I don't watch as much college football just because I got little kids. I mean, you've got a daughter, I try and limit that. And so I
just watch the Notre Dame game every Saturday at this point and then learn about the players after the college season is over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other guys that, and I do want to talk about TJ Hockenson, by the way, but are there any other guys that pop out off the top of your mind that you guys have like a hardcore fade on this season?
Well, I mean, TJ Hawkins, one of them, right? ACL, MCL, week 17, tight end there. Tyler Higbee is probably one. He was a wild card ACL, right? So that's probably another one. I'll have Taylor jump in. I know we have more hardcore fades.
Brooks is a big one for Carolina, the rookie.
Oh yeah, Jonathan Brooks. We don't like.
Oh really?
Yes.
Oh man,
I don't know if
like
he's
Jonathan
better than an ACL, but look, I get. There's no question he's very, very talented. Okay, but and I hope it's an isolated ACL. But you have to understand, Adrian Peterson was not the norm. And we can talk Breece Hall. Okay, Breece Hall, what he was able to do last year is not the norm, and we'll give him some credit there. And if you're really that good of a running back, your talent can carry you a long way. But the reason why I don't love Jonathan Brooks has nothing to do with knowing some insight regarding that his ACL is worse, has nothing to do with degrading him as a talent. I think it's hard enough for a quality, talented running back to come back and be strong the next year. It's even harder when you're asking someone to jump a level of play from college to the NFL. Jump the level of play, new scheme, new this, that, the other, and do your rehab. It's just asking you to do a lot. It's one thing when you went from RotoWire to Establish a Run. This is what you do, right? I mean, you just did it for a different team or a different level. But if they said all of a sudden you're going to start a new company and you're going to do a different level of work, and change, it just makes it harder. So it's nothing. That's my thinking on Jonathan Brooks. Going to Breece Hall, we did not like him very much last year. He broke some long runs and overperformed from what we were thinking. He did a nice job last year. And because of that, we're actually expecting a lot from him this year, second year off ACL. Not only that, but now he's got Aaron Rodgers, who we say is indeed healthy. Now he's got a revamped O-line, which might put him in good stead. So now you maybe have a more balanced attack, which could only help him. And who knows, maybe you got a few games with fourth quarter yards in there for Breece Hall, and so forth. So we actually do like Breece Hall quite a bit this year, even though we have to admit that we did not love him because of the injuries last year. Now, what he proved is he could run very well in a straight line early last year. And that's the first thing to recover from an ACL. It's the other cutting ability that he ended up getting better later season. But he was effective. So I think he's quite a talent.
Yeah, I've got him super, super high. He goes super, super high in drafts. Last guy I'll ask about, Joe Burrow shows up to training camp looking like some cross between Slim Shady and a member of the band NSYNC. But that's not the big concern here. The potential concern that I have is I saw some stuff about somebody expressing some worry about maybe lingering effects from his wrist injury. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, I have a friend who was a Chargers right tackle, Vaughn Parker, who now started a podcast with a friend of his, and she does some fashion buying like for Nordstrom. So I said, you got to be talking about Joe Burrow. What was worse, his hair, or do you remember seeing that Paris runway fashion show that he did with Jamar Chase with the cutout backs and the tuxedos and bare backs? I mean, I don't know. It's just not my world. I mean, whether it's hair or the color of hair or in sync or the fashion, I'll stay away from that. But from the medical perspective, the bad news is this wrist injury on Joe Burrow, and I believe, I was open to be stand corrected, we're the only ones who came out early and said it was a scapholunate ligament tear, and very unusual injury, not happened before on a dominant side wrist of a quarterback that we know of. And it did turn out to be that based on what the Bengals are saying. But also, we have great confidence that he should be fine. Okay. It was a early primary repair, fixed well. They've got a good medical staff there. I'm not really worried about Joe Burrow. And look, don't freak out if Joe Burrow doesn't do a lot this preseason. He never has, period. you go through it, I might get the dates and times wrong, but one year it was a holdout. The next year it was coming off the ACL. The next year it might have been a contractual thing or COVID or something. The year after that, last year, it was his calf. The guy's never really had a training camp.
Yeah.
And been fine. So if he doesn't have much of a training camp here, I'm not worried about his wrist. And I like talking about, I feel like I'm always negative Nancy sometimes on guys. So I like being able to talk about guys that we're high on.
Good.
And we're high on Joe Burrow. Don't think that wrist is going to be an issue at all. Now, there was something, and I got engaged a little bit. Taylor can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I forget. I believe AJ Hawk on Pat McAfee.
Mm-hmm.
And I love AJ Hawk. He's been on our podcast. I've been on his stuff and the whole. I love McAfee, the whole deal, and they're very authentic. But AJ Hawk and or Darius Butler were talking about their experiences with a scapholunate ligament tear and how difficult it was and how they lost motion and everything else. And what I pointed out to them was that's because they're a tough guy and they played through the rest of the season developing arthritis and losing motion and then had a later reconstruction. Joe Burrow shut down his season, rightfully so, and had immediate primary repair surgery. A comparison is maybe Brock Purdy's ulnar collateral ligament repair at the end of the previous season, where last year he was fine, versus all these pitchers and people that have ulnar collateral ligament reconstruction when they pitch till it's shredded and then they're out. So there's different types of injuries. They're not all comparable. And that's my favorite thing of where you look at it. You can't just say scapholunate ligament, oh, that's no good. It's what kind and the nuance around it and what kind of player. So I think we had a nice discourse with AJ Hawk and company. They do a great job. And I'm pointing out the difference. And I think they acknowledged, okay, that makes them feel a little better about Joe Burrow. But I'm great with Joe Burrow.
That sounds great. Good to hear.
Doc, bring up your thoughts on TJ Hockenson. I know Evan asked about them earlier.
Oh, yeah. ACL, MCL, week 17, multi-ligament, running, jumping, cutting. Look, he's a big-bodied guy. I mean, can he get some targets off of that? But he's not going to be what you expect out of TJ Hockenson for at least the first half of this season. So, it all depends on the ADP, right? Where are you at? But I would not reach for him early. I mean, look, if you're getting later in your draft and, a late bye week stash or injury protection down the road, when you're drafting down lower, and how low, that's up for Evan to jump in to tell people how low or where does he become a bargain.
I think that if we're playing in a regular redraft season long, the type of fantasy that the vast majority of people play, although other forms of fantasy are obviously growing exponentially like every year. But if you're playing in a regular redraft season long, I don't think that he is draftable. You're not going to have enough bench space. You're going to end up dropping him, when the bye set in and you need injury, guys start to get hurt. I don't think you can count on him playing before week 5 or week 6. And who knows if he would even be effective when he does return. I think you can draft him in best ball, but it would only be as like a third tight end, and hoping that you get some production from him in the second half of the season, where you can weather the storm with your other 2 tight ends in weeks 1 through 7, let's say. But I don't think that he's even like, I do a top 150 every year in terms of rankings, and like he's not even going to be as a top 150 player. It's geared toward the season-long redraft leagues.
Well, for me, like I said, the only draft that I do, Scott Fishbowl 14, is the Cinderella League. But I knew the 11 other guys were going to take TJ Hockenson before I wanted to. So it wasn't going to be an issue for me, right? I mean, I'm just down on him. So it becomes a non-factor there, and they did. But I do agree with you. You were talking about Green Bay, that they've got some talent there. And I like Luke Musgrave a bunch. It's one of the tight ends that you're probably shouting out there as a target. And Green Bay's offensive line looks a little better this year.
Yep.
Going back to Joe Burrow, my bigger worry for Joe Burrow is not his wrist. My bigger worry for Joe Burrow is the Browns. not the Cleveland Browns, Orlando Brown at left tackle and Trent Brown at right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
And will those guys hold up with their history of injury issues, a little bit age and otherwise? The Achilles heel for Joe Burrow is his right and left tackle, the two Browns. It's not Joe Burrow's wrist, in my opinion.
They did draft Amarius Mims in the first round. So they gave themselves some protection, especially against Trent Brown. I mean, Trent Brown's already on NFI. So they gave some, but this is also a guy, Amarius Mims, who started 8 games in his entire college career. But at least they do have some talent waiting in the wings in case, Trent Brown, they can only get a couple games out of him.
Well, teams aren't dumb, right? They're smart. They know what they have and what they need. And that's probably one reason why they went and drafted the kid.
Yep.
And hopefully it'll be, like the Cleveland Browns last year when Jack Conklin went down. Daquan Jones stepped right in and took his job, basically, right?
Yeah.
And played very well. So the Browns were prepared for that. And that's probably what the Bengals are trying for, too, knowing where their weaknesses potentially are. But that's where I would put the Bengals.
Sounds great.
I had a list of quarterbacks, Doc, just to talk about. So you have Watson, Burrow, Rodgers, Cousins, Richardson's, and Daniel Jones. Which one of those are you most concerned about going into next year, Doc?
Yeah, I want to hear you selfishly. I want to hear you talk about Deshaun Watson.
There you go.
Deshaun Watson, I believe, will be, from his shoulder perspective, fine this year. It's still my belief that shoulder injury, he played through some. He certainly at least played through the one game, right? And it may have been more. And that's why I always, and I think it's been confirmed now, it was my theory, it was a posterior shoulder labral tear injury, which bodes better for a quarterback, bodes worse if he were a left tackle or offensive lineman. But this type of injury bodes better. So I would expect Deshaun Watson physically to be in good position to have an excellent season. No worries. Aaron Rodgers, no one's even worried about. I mean, the number one question when Aaron Rodgers went down week 1 last year, number one question I fielded on McAfee or whoever was, will he ever play football again? I'm like, I guarantee you he'll play football again. And even if he's a half step slow, he's still faster than Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and my guy, Phillip Rivers, right? And there's no way a competitor like that is going out on that type of injury. And I even said that there was an outside chance if the Jets could stay competitive and make the playoffs that he could return. Obviously, there was some flirting with that idea, but obviously it didn't come to fruition, a late season return. So Aaron Rodgers, I think people are forgetting about. Kirk Cousins is also an Achilles later season, but if Kirk Cousins really needs to rely on his Achilles, the Falcons are in trouble anyways. It's just the position of quarterback, and he's going to be able to do enough to be able to move in the pocket and throw the ball. So some optimism there. We talked about Burrow, Watson, Anthony Richardson.
Let me ask you one more thing. So, the Falcons, obviously, they shocked the world when they took Michael Penix, number 8 overall. One of the initial, speculation that came from that was that maybe Kirk Cousins' recovery isn't going as smoothly as they maybe would like. Do you think that there could be any truth to that? I mean, that was a shocking draft pick.
Well, look, there's no question. I always say that when something looks dumb, silly, or otherwise on the outside, it's just because we on the outside don't know all the facts on the inside, right? And not every draft pick or decision works out to be smart, but when you make it, no one makes a dumb decision knowingly in the room. And I've been there with the team, and the media world was saying that was dumb. Well, you guys just don't know the whole story, right? Now, is the whole story that they just love Penix that much? Is the whole story or part of the story they were worried about Kirk Cousins? I don't know. I don't have a particular worry about Kirk Cousins. Yes, it's a little bit different. It's back foot instead of front foot. Aaron Rodgers has a stronger arm than Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins' injury was a half a season later. So that's all true. But, Rodgers, is a little wily mobile and can and does run on occasion. Kirk Cousins, I think you're in trouble if he runs. And so part of that is that, but I think he'll be okay there. And certainly he has some weapons, and I'm expecting because of this, maybe, Kyle Pitts last year we were down on because of his MCL and PCL and surgery. And this year with the new offense, we're kind of up on Kyle Pitts and another year removed from his knee injury. Another guy we're kind of high on, believe it or not, is CJ Stroud, because last year he did very, very well with a patchwork offensive line. Their 5 starters didn't have one game together, and yet he was very effective. And what I saw is he was able to keep his eyes downfield as he moved in the pocket and slid around and had these, completions after he's been running around back there for 5-6 seconds, which is very hard to defend. And now with an offensive line that comes in healthy, there may be a jump for even him, and he already starting very, very high. Anthony Richardson, we're not worried about the shoulder injury per se, but this is an example that I would say that I'm not calling Anthony Richardson injury prone, but his style of play makes him more prone to injury. And the difference is injury prone is 2 people take the same hit and this one guy is out, one guy's fine. That's an injury prone guy. This is 2 people take the same hit and they both get injured, but it's a style of play. I've always said that if you're running for yardage on first down and running out of part of your offense, you're taking more hits and more risks than if you run now and again and on that key 3rd and 8 play to get the first down, right? And so I think his style of play puts him a little more risk, but I'm not particularly worried about the right shoulder in and of itself.
Evan, I had a question for you. How do you, when you hear about contract, like stuff like Brandin Aiyuk, Jamar Chase, how do you approach that when you make your rankings?
I think it's very case by case. With Brandin Aiyuk, just using common sense, the 49ers are, they have the most talented roster in the league. They are on a Super Bowl track. They were in the Super Bowl last year. There is no reason at all for them to be incentivized to trade Brandin Aiyuk. I mean, if they really don't want to pay him or think that they can't or whatever, they can let him sit out a few games, and I think eventually he's going to come back and play. They could win games without him. I mean, I think that they hold almost all of the leverage in that situation. And so I haven't even moved him down in my rankings. Now, if we get close to the season and it looks like he actually might sit out games, which I don't think that he will, then I might have to move him down. But I have not moved him at all. And I think really it makes sense for both sides to come together and get an agreement done before the season, because Brandin Aiyuk is a critical part of that. I mean, you think about you think about like the old Shanahan offenses with that X receiver Julio Jones, Andre Johnson under Gary Kubiak, who was a Shanahan guy. That is a critical position. Rod Smith. That's a critical position in that offense, and that's what Brandin Aiyuk plays.
One player too had a couple injury issues is Raheem Mostert. You remember a couple years ago, Jamal Williams had the 20, and he regressed all the way to almost 0. Mm-hmm. Do you see something like that with Achane? Especially Doc, you have issues with his knee, right? We've had in the past.
Yeah, I mean, Achane's on the rise, obviously. Mostert has another guy that's done well with his knee injury history, even though we've always been a little guarded every year. Is this the year he really drops off? Who knows? But that's a possibility.
His backfield partner, Devon Achane, had a number of injuries, I think mostly ankle last season. Does he stand out as a guy that you guys are low on in terms of his 6 score?
No, we're good. We're good with his 6 score and his talent, et cetera. You know who we are down on for the Dolphins? Look, Tua, obviously he got through last year without the concussions. He's got the big contract. You never know when you're going to take another head blow. And if he does, he's not out for a week. He's out for more just because of his history. Their offensive line will have some worries, but our big worry for the Dolphins, and it doesn't directly play into fantasy per se from the Dolphins, but who they play is their linebacking core. I mean, we couldn't have had a bigger fade against the Dolphins in that freezing cold game in Arrowhead, not because Tua was from a warm weather state. It was because they had no linebackers. They were on guys off the street. They were on a guy that was in his prime when I was a team doctor, Melvin Ingram, who I love, but Melvin Ingram was admittedly, several lbs heavier than he was and not ready to play 65, 70 snaps. He was a fill-in stopgap edge rusher, but they've still got linebacker problems on the Dolphins. And what does that mean going forward? Who knows? Maybe that makes you love their offensive weapons more because they got to push the ball downfield and score.
Yeah, definitely set up as a shootout team this season.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to cover or bring up, Evan? I mean, this is this is the one podcast we make it the Evan Silva podcast. We don't go into we don't really do a part two. We just run it with you.
I think we hit on like probably about 20 players, team situations. It was pretty comprehensive. I can't even think of any other guys to talk about. I guess one more. Cooper Kupp has kind of started to show signs of decline. I think he's getting up there a little bit in age. He kind of transferred the offense so that Puka Nacua would be their number one receiver last year. Sean McVay was actually on the Athletic podcast, and even he admitted they didn't expect Puka Nacua to be that awesome in his first season. They envisioned him as maybe a guy who could be like Robert Woods for them back in the day, but Puka Nacua is like, I mean, shoot, at this point, he's a top 10 fantasy pick. But Cooper Kupp, are you worried? Stefania Bell, who does a great job for ESPN, came on our show last year, and she outlined concerns about Cooper Kupp, the accumulation of injuries. Like this, the dude has taken a lot of hits over the years. He plays in the slot. There's a lot of traffic in the middle of the field. Can he bounce back to what he was before? What are your thoughts on Cooper Kupp?
Well, I think it's going to be very hard for him to bounce back to, quote, what he was before, right? Because what he was before was a top 3 receiver in the league, right? Now, just with the presence of Puka Nacua, he's not going to get that target share and the whole deal. Health-wise, look, he is getting older, but I believe in his style of play. He is so smart as a wide receiver and so wily that I still think that he's got some miles left in him. At least I hope so. He's one of the lower guys that I did draft in the Scott Fish Bowl. I think his health is going to be fine. I think he's going to have a bounce back year, but I'm not saying he's going to be a top 3 receiver. The bar for that is so high, right? And those days are gone based on age, based on injuries, based on Puka Nacua. I think my bigger worry for Cooper Kupp in his production is less Cooper Kupp's health, as much as the health of the Rams offensive line, which has some issues, right? And they're a little thinner. And quite honestly, the health of Matthew Stafford. No one questions Matthew Stafford in terms of his toughness, and I'm not doing that either. But remember, he's got a lingering neck issue that almost caused him to retire. Mm-hmm. And if that neck issue flares up again, I don't see him playing through it. So that's as much worry as anything. And then, obviously, if it's not Matthew Stafford, whether Jimmy G or Stetson Bennett, I mean, your Cooper Kupp shares are not going to be worth as much. All right. Thank you, Evan. And where can they find your stuff? I think everyone knows Establish the Run, but give it a shout out.
Yeah, at Establish the Run on Twitter, establishtherun.com. Our draft kit is live. We gradually add content to it throughout training camp. There's already a ton of content in there. And I will be releasing my updated top 150 rankings early tomorrow. I'm gonna submit them tonight, and they'll be on the website early tomorrow. So come check it out, establishtherun.com.
Well, I know this, Evan. Look, I will admit to you that because I'm just so all consumed with injuries, I hear stuff that you do, but I actually don't go on your site just because it's just too granular for me. I'm trying to look.
I go on your site, Dr. Chow. So
well, thank you. But I can tell you, all my guys, and Taylor especially, they buy the subscription. They say it's the best, and they say you're the best. And
that's
so
awesome.
There's no question. All of my staff get your subscription and look at it. So probably by osmosis, I do too. But I'm just being honest that, I just don't have time to.
I'm not surprised.
I probably do, because when we talk
I didn't think that you were.
Guys,
I never thought that you would be scrolling through establishtheRun.com, Dr. Chow.
He is through me, Evan. Don't worry. Every day.
I love it. Thanks.
I get the Cliff Notes version from Taylor and others. Perfect. I don't read all the pages of the book, but I get the Cliff Notes version. So that's all that we need. Evan Silva, thank you so much. Appreciate you, my friend. Long time in the industry here, and you're one of the first guys that I think I chatted with and worked with, and I appreciate you so much. Establish the Run. Congratulations on your 5 years of success, and 5 more, 15 more, 25 more or more. You do great work with your partner, Adam Leviton.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chow, and nice chatting with you, Taylor.
Thank you. All right. No part 2 this week. We go big with Evan Silva every time. No part 2. Although, just like Evan, man, we're so busy. I don't even think it's football season for me, Evan. I mean, Olympics and Simone Biles and the calf and baseball and still kind of basketball. And we do golf and stuff too. I mean, we're kind of like you. We're sport. That's why it's not Pro Football Doc anymore. It's Sports Injury Central. It's year-round injuries. And we actually, and we'll talk about it after football season maybe, we actually find, I don't know about you guys, basketball almost more actionable. Because we always talk about cluster injuries. So for years, I don't know, you've probably noticed, most people don't, we actually list 23 starters on our field view, 11 on offense and 12 on defense, because we think the slot corner is that important, right? Yeah. And so no one's really calls us out on it when in our field views we have that. But in an NBA, it's 5 starters. So one guy is equal to 4.5 injuries. So he's your main rebounder or this, that. I mean, so we actually find basketball pretty actionable, whereas in football, we have to look harder for cluster injuries. Look, everyone knows if Lamar Jackson's out, but we're more concerned about, the D line, if there's multiple injuries there, or like we say, the Dolphins linebackers, etc. But basketball too. So we'll have to maybe bring you back on for a basketball thing in the off season. But thank you so much, Evan, for all the time.
Thank you so much.